Welcome to week 8, our last week discussing The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. And we are joined again by Dr. Jay Watson for this last discussion on part 4. And also I sent this out to the group last week, but just want to remind you that our next book pick is a book by Eudora Welty. We like to alternate books between a book by Welty and one that's by an author connected to Welty in some way. And our next book will be Welty's short story collection, The Wide Net. And we will be referencing the Library of America edition for that book. And we'll be starting those discussions on Monday, May 16th, still at noon Central Time. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Jay Watson. Thanks for joining us again, Jay.
Thanks. And thank you all for being here. I see it's looking like about 55, 56, intrepid folks who are just here all the way down to the bitter end. When I heard about your first session, I heard there were over 100 people, trying to get in the waiting room. So I actually feel like pretty successful in only chasing away about 50% of the population that was reading the novel. That's better than I usually do in my classes. So, I'm going to feel like this is a victory.
You can blame me, Jay.
No, well, we could blame Faulkner, but I tend to like to kind of hold him above that kind of, that kind of rough treatment. I thought I would start today just by asking a question. And if this is something that y'all talked about last week, we don't really have to linger too long on it, but this is a question directed especially to first-time readers. There are 4 Compson siblings. There are 4 sections of this novel. How many of you all got to section 4 and were expecting a monologue from Caddy Compson? I mean, I've probably read the novel 20 times, but the first time I ever read it, that's absolutely what I was thinking. So just kind of wondering, and again, somebody could clue me in if this is something y'all actually talked about last week, but just kind of, what do you make of the fact that Faulkner opted in a different direction for this last section? I mean, what do you think the implications are? Why do you think it might be significant that he did not give Caddy an interior monologue to go along with all of her brothers?
We didn't talk about that's last week, Jay, but we certainly need to.
I kind of feel like it's the elephant in the room when you get to section 4. I mean, it's not that there isn't a whole lot of other things we can talk about and that we will talk about, but just starting from the opening lines where you are just not in the same kind of approach or strategy that we have gotten used to over time. So I would invite people to share. I see a couple of hands up. I just kind of want to know what people's responses or impressions were.
We have John and then Laura.
I'll just try to be brief about this. Professor Watson, I think the book is extraordinarily difficult to read. And I think of there been a 4th stream of consciousness. it would have, to me, it would have been impenetrable. And so I think he is, I think he was wanted to just give it, a narrative by, to the extent that there can be an omniscient narrator who was keyed in to some extent to those prior monologues. To me, that's what, that may have been the purpose. I have to say this, I knew before I read it the first time, which was a long time ago, that the 4th section of the book was not going to be a stream of consciousness. I was prepared for it when I read it, but that's my take on it.
All right, Laura and then Jenny.
Yeah, I'm a first time reader, and I wanted to hear from Kathy for sure, but I would say specifically as I was reading the fourth section, I also really wanted to hear more from inside Quentin's head. I really, really, really wanted that.
Yeah, we could say then that there are two Compson women that we might have wanted more access to, that for interesting reasons and with interesting effects, we don't get access to in this final section.
Jenny and then John.
I guess I didn't know what to expect on the fourth section, but Caddy is always there throughout each section. It was her voice, it's a silent voice, it's in the background, it's kind of always swirling around. So in a way, she was always there. I don't think not having her, as the narrator in the fourth made that much of a difference for me. I had one quibble with Caddy. In the very beginning, it starts with Caddy, the caddy on the golf course, and switches to Caddy in terms of Benji's narration. And it just seemed like it was so, to me, it felt dishonest. It was, why did he, it was a way to get into Benji's free associations and all, maybe, but there was just something about it, Caddy, because I went back, I'm like, who are they talking about? And then it just felt dishonest. And please tell me that no one else had that feeling and I'm way off somewhere. I'd appreciate that because it's bugged me.
Well, I do think you're right that it's a way to reveal how Benji's mind works, that, and that we have to kind of reconstruct it after the fact. I mean, something very surprising and puzzling goes on the very first page, and it takes us a little while to learn what's going on there. You probably noticed that this circles back around very near the ending, right, of the novel, where Luster taunts Benji by saying caddy again, while they've been outside on Sunday, kind of walking around near the golf course. So it sort of comes full circle there. And I don't know if other people had, people have sort of been talking about how, she's already there. Maybe she doesn't need to narrate because she's so conspicuously there in her absence throughout the whole novel. I kind of feel like when you move away from the brothers' monologues in section 4, you actually encounter less Caddy, that she's less there, in fact, than she is in the other 3 sections. People might disagree. And I think there are ways of reading the significance of her absence practically onto every page of the novel, but I think there's much less just registering her as a character in section 4. She shows up through Luster's wordplay. And I think, although this may be in section 3, I may be misremembering, but I think Mrs. Compson says something to Jason, some kind of offhand thing to Jason about Quentin and Caddy, sort of about the way that they always were as children. And those are some of the only times that she, or even the sound of her name, appears in section 4. And that's, again, it's a further kind of receding of her. She's not only not getting the narrative voice, but she's figuring on the page, in a lesser way in section 4. And that might seem to do her a great injustice or a great disservice. And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of, invited people to share, just kind of how it's shaping your sense of the overall flow or the overall direction of the novel.
John.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pearl
Yes.
and Tom, and then Mary.
Yes, I did spend an amount of time wondering about Faulkner's choice of narrators and how the book might have been different or might have been the same had he used different narrators like Caddy, Miss Caroline, the Jason's prostitute in Memphis, and Dilsey, you know, if those would have been the chief voices, what different things might we have learned about the Compton family and the whole tale? But I don't know, we might come out somewhere the same place, but it sort of seems like this is a study of veiled male, Southern male character in the end as it comes out. So I don't know. There's a lot of things that Faulkner does that you wonder about. Why is he fragmented everything like this? Why is everything such kind of a puzzle? So there's a lot to think about with this book, and maybe in the future some enterprising writer can write a follow-up novel from those points of view. Would be interesting.
Do you know there is a short story called Candace, and I forget the name of the author, but that's exactly what he does. Is he reconstructs Cattie's story, kind of gives her the narrative that she never quite got in the novel, but he only writes a short story. He doesn't write a 300-page novel about it.
Tom or Pearl or Tom?
I just wanted to say, and this sort of follows up with what John is hinting at, and I know you talked last week about it being from the third person point of view when Dilsey is presenting that. And I think it is partly because Faulkner wasn't confident and then took the easy out, I would say, of not trying to be in the feminine consciousness of this, that Cattie is really constructed by her brothers and her father, and then banned from the physical place by the mother. So why go there and try to give that inside consciousness? And it's a sort of the same with Dilsey. He's not in Dilsey's consciousness the same way he is in the others. He takes the third person point of view to sort of report it. And one of the chats was about what was his model for this. I mean, he definitely listens to the Black preachers for Reverend Shegog's sermon, for example. And otherwise, Dilsey's language, it seems to me, stays true to the character and everything that the brothers have reported in their consciousness, in a sense. So I think it was a stylistic choice not to represent her and let her remain a mystery unto herself. That's
Mary?
it.
Yes, I just want to say I like the fact that Cattie remains enigmatic, and that she doesn't, it just makes it, like what is not spoken or said is sometimes as loud as what is spoken or said. And I think that she is less Southern, and that she doesn't feel the patriarchal, the attachment to the land and the place and to the Southern ideals. So I think if she had been more present, I like not totally knowing who Cattie is.
And Harriet?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that we could say that Cattie's been there in all the sections on every page, but we could also say that she hasn't been there at all, that we have had entire versions of Cattie that don't mesh, that we have Benji's Cattie as the smell of trees, and Quentin says, you've never done that, have you? Once a bitch, always a bitch. And so I kind of think that we are emphasizing the construction through these sets of different sets of ideas that belong. And in some ways, I think that Dilsey is a kind of stand-in for Cattie, in the sense that she too is someone who has not been fully formed by the patriarchy, by the set of ideas that that the novel that the brothers represent.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're describing people who are far more modern in their orientation, and I would include Dilsey in that, in addition to the, to the young women,
Yeah.
far more modern in their orientation than the Compson brothers are.
Joellen?
I would just say in support of that notion of leaving Caddy somewhat enigmatic and emphasizing her role by absence, that this is a period of great experimentation and point of view. And in fact, like my Antonia by Willa Cather, Gatsby is narrated by Nick Carraway. Those central figures we hear dramatized, but we don't hear from them in the same way. So that was something that was sort of popular. And I think it also is something that has been used by a lot of male writers who write about a kind of muse figure as a woman, and who remains without a kind of absence and mysterious figure. That's going out there a little bit, but I don't want to, I'll toss out Lolita as an example, but there are lots and lots of those, but that absent woman's voice.
So I'll just add a word. These are a lot of great remarks, and they do remind me of things that come up in my classroom. When I bring this issue up with students, we generally go around and around this issue, and some students feel cheated, and then some students share this view that in some ways it makes Caddy more, not in a way to put her voice on the page. I just want to maybe add a quick speculation about motive, and then an observation about the effect of this decision, whatever the motive might have been. Faulkner on many occasions talked about Caddy Compson as the single literary creation that meant the most to him. Right? He called her his heart's darling. He would often say that nothing really ever moved him very much about reading or writing literature, kind of in comparison to, Caddy up there in the pear tree, trying to, learn something meaningful about life. So this is an author who was tremendously invested in this character. And I think, I think for him, there's not only the sense that it might actually diminish the reader's responsibility or opportunity to take all of these, constructed versions of Caddy and combine them into some sort of experience of our own. It might let the reader off the hook and make for a less active reader. But I think for Faulkner himself, it would have risked taming the character, domesticating the character. I mean, to give her a voice and a point of view that sees things in some ways and not others. And Faulkner might have to risk that point of view not being profound and mysterious and adventurous at every single moment, because as the other siblings teach us, people are fallible and speakers are fallible. So I do really share that impression from Joellen and from Mary, that in a way, leaving Caddy's voice out of it makes for a more magical encounter with the character. So that's a word about motive. But I would notice also the effect of this decision that Faulkner has made, which is not only not to give Caddy a monologue, but it's not to use interior monologue at all, right? I mean, nor does he give Dilsey one, if we're going to think of Dilsey as a focal figure, and he doesn't give Miss Quentin one, as someone else observed. So there's no monologue at all here. And one of the results of that is that there's no flashback. I mean, this section is not dominated by the kind of welling up of the past to take over people's lives in the present moment. We really spend the entire section in April 8th, 1928, instead of, jumping all around back and forth in the 30-year history of this family, or this little unit of siblings. And so this continues a process I think I talked about with Jason's section the last time we were together, which is that there is a kind of opening out from the deep past of Benji and Quentin more toward the present moment of 1928. Jason spends less time in memory than his brothers do. And when he is in memory, his memories tend to be of more recent events, more recent kinds of things. And so in these ways, Faulkner is easing us away from this kind of death grip on the past into a fuller engagement with the present moment, we could say the narrative is breaking out by the time it gets to the fourth section. And what it's breaking out of is this entrapment in people's heads and voices, this claustrophobic place where the characters are talking to themselves, and we're breaking out of this entrapment in the past. And so the point I would make about this is that this is the logic of Easter. This is the meaning of Easter, is the celebration of the fact that new life resides and, is demonstrated in the act of breaking out, right? The Easter story is a story of breakout and resurrection. And so in some ways, not only is Faulkner telling that story directly by telling us about Easter Sunday, did y'all look last week at the passage where we see Miss Quentin's room after she ran away?
We did not talk about that. one.
Let's look at it if you've got your book. I mean, this is where Faulkner is really doing Easter right on its face in section 4. It's page 282 of the Vintage International edition. If you're in another edition, it might be, 15 or 20 pages into the text. But this is after Jason has finally put 2 and 2 together at the breakfast table and figured out who broke the window to his bedroom, right? And gone up there and looked. And now he needs to get into Quentin's room to see what's going on up there. And he gets the keys from his mother and opens the door. And in the middle of page 282, the door opened, swung inward. He stood in it for a moment, hiding the room. Then he stepped aside. "Go in," he said in a thick, light voice. They went in. It was not a girl's room. It was not anybody's room. And the faint scent of cheap cosmetics and the few feminine objects and the other evidences of crude and hopeless efforts to feminize it, but added to its anonymity, giving it that dead and stereotyped transience of rooms in assignation houses. This is a tomb, but it's an empty tomb. The bed had not been disturbed. On the floor laid a soiled undergarment of cheap silk, a little too pink. From a half-open bureau drawer dangled a single stocking. The window was open. The stone has been rolled away. A pear tree grew there, close against the house. It was in bloom. It's a springtime symbol, right? It's an image of new life, of returning life. And as such, it reminds us that Easter is a springtime story, right? Very deeply and very fundamentally a story about regeneration. And the branches scraped and rasped against the house and the myriad air, driving in the window, brought into the room the forlorn scent of the blossoms. So that's even the scent of new life, right? Coming into this kind of crypt, this dead, empty place. That's the Compson house. So forgive me for going on and on about it, but I mean, Faulkner very much has the Easter Sunday narrative in mind, shaping the story of Quentin's escape, right, from the Compsons on Easter Sunday. This is a story of breakout that might mean new life and new possibility for Quentin, right? And that reminds us that long before her, Caddy also broke away. Caddy also got out and got away from this family. And as such, with nobody flashing back to her, is nowhere to be seen, right? On April 8th, 1928. She's another successful getaway in this story. So there's a method in Faulkner's madness, even in the way that he tells the narrative, right? As an act of liberation, and liberation from the kind of stranglehold that the past has had over the characters and the narrators up to now.
Marcia.
Thank you. That is really helpful to me because an image that I thought was just fabulous that I've been thinking about is the clock in the kitchen. In the Compson house, you have a clock that keeps the time 3 hours behind. And that's the perfect image for the situation of the Compson's household, attitudes, lifestyle, their bewilderment at what's going on in the world, their own life and outward. The clock is the perfect image to go to letting you see the past present as it is present at all the time in that house, and setting it against Quentin's escape. Thank you.
So, this wasn't a phrase in the vernacular back then yet, right? But Dilsey knows what time it is, right? Dilsey knows what time it is. And these scenes demonstrate it. And,
So the clock, even though the Compson house rings out 3 hours behind time, right? Dilsey knows.
Compsons don't know what time it is, right? But Dilsey knows what time it is. And Luster knows what time it is. Because in the final scene of the novel, Luster is the one who turns the carriage to go clockwise around the square, right? And Benji goes ballistic about it and insists that it, it sort of be restored to the pattern in the, the direction that he likes best, which is to go counterclockwise. So, again, it's like Benji doesn't know what time it is. Luster knows what time it is. These characters understand something about life, and they understand something about the 20th century and participating in the 20th century that is lost on the Compson brothers, and I think and the Compson parents as well.
Pearl and then Jacob.
It's also the 3 hours that Christ was crucified, from 12 to 3. The other sections are all other days of the Easter weekend. So it's just all a beautiful part of that.
Yeah, you can do some real backfilling now that we've kind of now that it doesn't just seem incidental that this is Easter weekend. You might think back about, whatever significance there is to find in the fact that Jason's story takes place on Good Friday, right? And that Benji's story takes place on Holy Saturday, when, according to some Christian theology, this is when Christ is descended into hell, right? And is harrowing hell of the souls of the good but the unsaved, who went before him. So there's a lot more work you can do with the Easter narrative, kind of once section 4 really clues you into the fact that Faulkner is using it with some purpose.
Jacob?
I think it's a really cool reading of this section, a section I've always struggled with. With that being said, what are we to do with Dilsey, that one of the most memorable images of this section to me is Dilsey going up and down the stairs, almost like it's a cruel escalator. She's trapped. I mean, I like these images. I love that baby Quentin escapes. But what are we to do with Dilsey, who ultimately, if I remember right, she returns to the house and is on this, death spiral, this loop that Mrs. Compson keeps her, going up. It's almost like a horrifying rewriting of Langston Hughes' poem, Mother to Son. This life ain't no stair for me. And she's constantly having to do that. Mm-hmm. So I'm just interested how we can make sense of Dilsey.
Well, I think section 4 is probably the best argument that, Faulkner is not just making a mammy figure out of Dilsey, that there's, there's a very unsentimental acknowledgement of just the kind of, the toil and the hard effort that she's had to put into this household, and the way that it makes the household as capable as it can be of actually functioning, in the modern world. But I'm with you, Jacob. I'm haunted by that very short passage when the Compsons are all down at the breakfast table and the narrator says they heard her on the stairs. They heard her a long while on the stairs. And it really takes you into just the sheer bodily toil, that she puts in, day by day, round the clock, right? I mean, for the Compsons. So this section is a testament to that as well. I mean, I'm not gonna push that so far as to say martyrdom, kind of along our sort of Christological lines, but I think, this is where the work of Black labor in upholding the white household comes the most fully out into the open. And in some ways, it seems to be like only her faith and her church that really kind of gives her the wherewithal to, to stay with this. But I do think she's raised a family that knows how to become modern. And I just think you can see that in, in the son Versh already having left for Memphis. I mean, he's joined the Great Migration. And, the grandson Luster, who again, kind of like just signals with his carriage driving that he's ready to participate in the forward movement of time and ready to be modern, with the rest of Jefferson. And so, something to be said for Dilsey while we watch her kind of subsumed under all of the white Compsons is that she and Roscus have raised a fairly functional, group of children and grandchildren. And they're very much there, as I think this has already been noted in the conversations, but the Gibsons are very much there to serve as a black foil, to the Compson family in the aggregate.
We have Jenny and then Joellen.
That idea of a foil, with Dilsey, I really see her as this figure, as a black family, as a buffer between kind of a demasculation of that family, the Compson family. She kind of held all the cards in a way. And I wonder if it would have been written in another way, that maybe that the Compsons would have matured and been able to have done something with their lives. The idea that I never thought of the Easter idea, and which is meaning I want to go back and read, what you were just talking about. But I was thinking about at that time in the 1920s, there were silent movies, and they were just starting with talkies. And you wonder how that made an effect in terms of the narration. I was struck, someone brought this up too, the first couple of classes about the tree and Caddy climbing that tree. And I can remember when I read it, I could hear the sound of those leaves. It was so strong. And then I started thinking about film and vaudeville and how that makes such a difference in terms of changing like the narrative in terms of what's going on, the importance of all that. And also Faulkner's, that Caddy was such this favorite character of his. But it's interesting because how unformed she is. It's like she's an accessory. And at that time, women were more accessories. And I wanted myself, I wish I would have known more about Caddy as things went on. And this is just an aside about that the idea of Caddy and Caddy, the golfer, bugged me. I remember I read one time that in film, you're only allowed one coincidence. And I'm not sure if that is true in writing, because I thought about the film The Graduate and the cross, and at the end when they ran off. And then it just hit me that his name was Benjamin. He was called Benji. And it was he was adrift, not knowing what to do after he got out of Harvard. I mean, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Anyway, so those are just my comments, but I love this idea of Easter. So I want to pursue that myself too.
I mean, and another thing that you can say about Easter, and it gets back to to the foil role that the Gibsons play, is that look at what Jason does all Easter Sunday, right? He spends it chasing after money and, trying to get vengeance against his niece. And look at what Ms. Compson does, right? She like sits up in her bed in her dark room and the Bible is face down on the floor. Mm-hmm. And then look at what Dilsey does. She goes with her family to church, right? And she takes Benji along with her. And without, proselytizing or suggesting that Faulkner is proselytizing, I mean, I do think we see the way that that church service really importantly kind of knits community together, right, for the African Americans of Jefferson, which is another really powerful contrast to the kind of the connections that all of these isolated, alienated Compsons seem unable to make with each other and with their town and with their world. So not the least, a significant thing about the church service is its social function, its cultural function, right? Where I'm sort of less interested in whether Jesus might save these people than in the steps they're taking towards saving themselves and creating some resilience and community for themselves in what they gather together to remember. And so you might say that in doing that, I mean, in getting together on Easter Sunday to remember something that happened, 2000 years ago, and to draw strength and coherence from it is also very, very different than the way memory works for the individual Compson brothers. So I think Faulkner's putting a lot of care into how, the Gibsons' participation in the Easter service is also really bringing out what's lacking among the Compsons.
Jay, what do you make of the emphasis in the sermon on I ain't gonna load down heaven. I ain't gonna load down heaven. So it's not just salvation here, but it's judgment. This is the ticket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not everybody gets in.
Yeah.
Right. And what you need.
It's like having a ticket to that show for a quarter. Yeah.
So what you need, according to the Reverend, right, is the recollection and the blood. Those are the things you need, right? So you need the sacrifice Christ made, and then you need to remember it, right? And you need to come together to remember it, and you need to remember it with others. And, Reverend Shegog doesn't know it, but he is just systematically rewriting and reinventing two of the motifs that dominate the Compson brothers monologues. So, they're obsessed with blood and the apparent kind of deterioration or declension of the blood, where what blood means is family and inheritance. And at the church service, you make community around blood, right? It's not hereditary, it's cultural. And recollection, right? I mean, you use recollection not to make your life miserable, but to make life bearable. So that's, that's two of the big motifs that get returned to and revised in the church service. And I would suggest that the third one is monologue, right? It's precisely the thing that is missing in section 4, because, you go to church and the sermon starts, and right where you might be expecting to find section 4's version of a monologue, right? Of the kind of, long verbal performance that we've gotten in the first 3 sections. Instead, you get Faulkner giving us the call and response, right, in African American churches. So the sermon is, constantly punctuated, affirmed, right, by the vocalizations of people in the congregation. A lot of times it's not even words, it's sighing and moaning or just simply agreeing. But, you don't get, monologue is not enough. Monologue isn't going to do it, right, in the life of language. It takes dialogue. And the church service demonstrates that. That's how a community becomes a community, is when the words go back and forth, right? And there's give and take. And in that sense, what the words are isn't even entirely the point. It's what this community is doing with their words.
Thank you. Joe Ellen and John, and then Pearl.
Thanks. Jay just used the word sacrifice, that all of this depends upon Christ's sacrifice. And I just can't get away from the feeling that Dilsey and Froney too are to some extent sacrificed. At least they're not going, it looks to me like they're not going to be able to modernize. And I just don't have a very good feeling. We have the open tomb of Quentin's room, but there are huge questions about what could happen to her. Caddy does get away, but those two women are left with no homes either. So there's some real tempering of this for me also.
It's all in how you read absence. And this is a novelist who is really, really preoccupied with how absence signifies, right? And the kind of value that it can create. So, you've got a final scene where you really see the difference between a young African-American man and then this Southern man on the town square of Jefferson. But this is also a final scene where Caddy and Miss Quentin are absent altogether, right? I mean, like they don't even have to act out a different relationship to time or to the 20th century in this community because they've left this community and entered the 20th century. In some ways, the absence might signal an even fuller engagement with life than the present characters can really dramatize for us. And that, again, is the logic of Easter. You know that Jesus is the Son of God because he wasn't there, right? He wasn't just a mortal man buried in a tomb, right? You know that he was who he said he was because he wasn't there. It's the absence from the tomb that marks his divinity. And without pushing that all the way to try to make some metaphysical claim, right, for Caddy and Quentin, I mean, their absence points to their significance and the valuation placed on their characters. And that's a logic Faulkner has learned from the Easter story, where what is not there is the most important thing of all. It's what is not there is the life-giving thing.
John?
This is somewhat about, Dilsey going up and down the stairs and also the way she treats Benji and Ms. Quentin. And I think the way she treats all the children except for Jason, and Jason won't let her treat him with love. To me, Dilsey is the one source of steadfast love that is in the presence of the lives of Benji and Caddy and possibly Quentin. I'd have to go back and look at that, and then Miss Quentin. She is so much to me what we read about her, and the way she always takes up for, again, except for Jason, and Jason won't let her. Jason is not open to her love that she has for them. It just reminds me so much of, for decades, coming up, there would always be there would nearly always be the help who had raised the children at the funerals. And then there came to be, but they'd be sitting in the back of the church, but you knew who they were. Nobody had to tell you. And then there came a time when, and this is just here, I'm talking about in Mississippi, maybe in the last 10 years, maybe it's been longer than that. Then the blacks who raised the children in the house, they're sitting with the family. They finally start sitting with the family and acknowledging what an important, vital source, the help was in raising the children, and they all loved one another.
So John, in that light, what do you make of the Gibsons taking Benji to church? In other words, they kind of flip the script on what you have just described. So how do you see that in light of what you were just talking about?
Again, it's her steadfast love for Benji, and she wants to expose him to Christ to the extent that he can be exposed, because of we talked about a little bit last week. My personal view is that he had the potential for more verbal skills than he was ever given the opportunity to exercise, just because the way he's treated, and it's just reprehensible. And then to me, I just want to mention this, the fact that the family doesn't tell Caddy that her father has died, and he learns about it in she learns about it in the newspaper by accident, and that's
And
the,
and in the back pages, in the back
Yeah.
page.
yeah, I just think that's terrible. I think, that's the worst, one of the worst things the Compsons could have possibly done to her,
Mhm.
It's-
Even on a less immediately religious level, but just kind of an ethical level or a moral level, the kindness shown in taking Benji to church is also that it gets him off the property, right? It
Yeah.
gets him off the Compson property. And, Faulkner shows you how when he walks through the gate, he stops whimpering, right? And when they come back after the church service and they walk in through the gate, he starts whimpering again. So there's that immediate, just sense of care involved in making the small gesture of letting him get away for a little while from this place that makes him miserable.
Pearl.
Tom,
This is for me, that the whole thing in the sermon where the minister has the effect of having the audience touch heart to heart without the need for words. And Benji sheds a tear so that he is obviously in some strange way getting the sermon in his own sense. So that, sets up the connection, but the goodness of Dilsey and Frony is not involved so much. They brought that minister all the way from St. Louis. And of course, that's St. Louis. His history now is a little darkened by some respects, but he built the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, and he did things for the poor and so forth during the Christmas season and so forth. So we have St. Louis being evoked as with its biblical and Christian reference there. The thing that in a way is unusual that Faulkner, when he wrote the addition to The Sound and the Fury, he makes Caddy supposedly, if the people who are reading the picture are right, that she's now the mistress of a member of the German general staff at the period of the end of World War II, which would put her in hell, in effect, in another tragic kind of way. But I kind of like to believe that Caddy, like Miss Quinton, could have escaped because she doesn't have any more responsibilities in the house with that funeral and so forth, and with her daughter's escape. So to me, there's an element of hope, and that Dilsey always represents hope in so many ways, that undeserved and whatever it is, but it's a possible element of resolution, that a more positive resolution, it seems to me.
And if I recall correctly, Dilsey won't confirm that is Caddy in the picture, right? They go to her seeking confirmation and she won't confirm it.
Yeah, good.
So Caddy rarely conforms to the way people in that world want to read her. And this just might be one more example where she's sort of slipped, not between the cracks, but between the pages, right, in that magazine.
Mary?
I just wanted to note that it strikes me as really sad that the Compsons, at least as the story is presented to us, do not have friends. I mean, you don't see anybody visiting Mrs. Compson. You do hear about Quentin's friends at Harvard that are short-term friends. Jason is, every relationship that Jason has with the community is contentious. So really, Dilsey's, and I mean, Uncle Maury is not, a person who could uplift you in any way. So really, it seems like Dilsey and her family are their only friends. And to be an old family that's been in the community for such a long time, it seems remarkable. I mean, remarkably sad.
Yeah, they don't do so well with their neighbors either. If you remember Mr. and Miss Patterson.
Chris?
I just had kind of a strange question that somehow came to me when I was reading the last section. that, you know, how Benji's pasture was sold and became a golf course, and Luster would take him over to watch them hit the balls. And at some point, I guess from what y'all are saying, maybe Luster called out caddy, but I was thinking it was the golfers like calling for their caddy, and how doubly cruel that was, that of all things it could have become, the word caddy was associated with this new use for the pasture. So it just continued to torment poor Benji, that the person he sought most was being called, you know, outside of the fence, and he probably didn't understand it at all. But I mean, I just may be crazy. I don't know if that's any truth to that or not, but just wanted to
No,
throw it out.
the golfers do call it out. And so there's an
Okay.
element there's an element of cruelty in taking Benji to that fence, as well as, you know, taking him back as close as he can get to his old pasture. So it's a very complex act on Luster's part. And I think you can read some hostility into it, as well as you can just read, you know, a kid doing his duties. So the golfers do say caddy in the beginning of the
Okay.
novel, and then Luster taunts Benji with it almost right at the end.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. I thought I just might jump in here while there's not a hand up and just acknowledge this question that Miriam put in the post, and I think had even emailed in to Lauren earlier about you know, how last week we talked about Faulkner showing off and playing around with these other literary voices. And so Miriam asked, I would love to know who Faulkner was imitating in the 4th section. So I'm going to give 2 answers to that. And other people may have thoughts of their own. On the one hand, when Faulkner was describing his process in the novel, he always said that the 4 sections represented kind of, you know, 4 failed efforts to tell the story right. And so he let Benji tell it, and, you know, that wasn't quite right. So he needed to let Quentin try to tell it, you know, to kind of supplement Benji. And then Quentin's wasn't quite right, and he let Jason try to tell it. And then what he would say was, and then he let Faulkner tell it. He let Faulkner tell it, as if the voice in the 4th section is Faulkner, right? Rather than necessarily being an imitation or even playing around with an imitation of other literary voices. But at the same time, and this has been pointed out by critics like Thaddeus Davis, Faulkner is kind of channeling or ventriloquizing the African-American writer James Weldon Johnson in section 4 with Reverend Shegog's sermon. Because Johnson had written a poetry collection in the 1920s he called God's Trombones. And it was a set of fictional African-American sermons set to poetry, set in poetic form. And one of those sermons in particular does bear a lot of similarities, both in the voicing of it, in the rhythm of the prose, in the use of the vernacular, and in the themes of it, to one of those sermons in God's Trombones. So, you know, there might have been a little less showing off there and a little bit more of a covert borrowing from an African-American writer, and you can make of that what you will. And it's also, you know, it's confined to one particular, you know, episode or stretch of section 4, rather than kind of being the voice that suffuses the whole thing. But within Faulkner telling it, there's a little bit of James Weldon Johnson telling it as well. But Miriam, I'd be curious if you had any ideas of your own about that. If you or anybody else heard other voices, you know, in play that Faulkner might have, you know, enjoyed ventriloquizing, right, if you will, in section 4.
Do I need to put my hand up?
No,
Am I
go.
showing up? Okay, sorry. I was just really taken with the how he did channel and exactly capture the cadences that I remember from growing up, which was, you know, 20, 30 years later, but still very much in the community.
Yeah, and I don't want to make more out of the literary borrowing than it was, or suggest that, like, you know, this is where Faulkner learns what African-American dialect sounds like, because, you know, the domestic worker for the Faulkners when William and his brothers were young, Carolyn Barr, used to take those children to church at an African-American church in Oxford. And so Faulkner would have had opportunity to observe, right, also, what the church service was like, and to observe it at a young age when, Faulkner's fiction bears out that a lot of experiences and memories that he had from a young age stuck with him really, really vividly. And so I think it's very credible that this was another set of experiences that really made an impression on him. So I don't want to imply that Faulkner had to go to books to get Reverend Shegog or to get Reverend Shegog's voice, but just to let you know that there is a book and a Black writer kind of in the DNA, the literary DNA of Reverend Shegog.
Thank you.
Any final questions?
Jean Medley has her hand up.
Yeah, Jean Medley.
Oh, this is the first time I've had the courage to read Faulkner, and I want to thank you both for this and the Welty House for this opportunity. But I had two quick questions, and one is, how did you go about choosing this Faulkner book for us to read? And then what would you suggest for our first-time readers? Where should we go from here?
Well, I should probably chime in here that Jay didn't select this book. Lauren and I did. And one reason we did was we thought it was of a length that we could manage in 8 sessions. And the other was that we both loved the book and wanted to talk about it. If I had had more, if we had had more time, I might have chosen Absalom instead, but I don't know if Jay would have, you think that would work well on Zoom, Jay?
I think it would now. I think, you would have an opportunity now with this group, having read The Sound and the Fury. And what Suzanne's talking about, Jean, is the fact that Absalom is another Faulkner novel where Quentin Compson and his father play pretty significant roles. And so you're seeing a kind of further development of the Compson story, or the Compson, constellation in that novel, really more than any of the other novels Faulkner wrote. So, Suzanne, I would think with a book group, taking those novels in order, not to say jump into Absalom next week, but, in reading The Sound and the Fury, you lay the foundation for asking some really interesting questions in Absalom, even though you could also read that novel, you could read it separately, or you could read it individually, but I think, a lot more emerges for readers who've read them both. And that's one way to answer Jean's second question, which is just kind of about where you go from here with Faulkner. And if it's the Compsons you're interested in and kind of their story and their world, there is a set of related texts that Faulkner wrote around the Compsons that includes Absalom, which I just mentioned, and then also some short stories that are narrated by Quentin. And those stories are actually, quite suggestive because they don't have Benji in them. They have the other siblings, but they don't have Benji. And you can find some of those stories in Faulkner's Collected Stories volume. One of them, a very fine story, is called That Evening Sun. Another one is called A Justice. And I might be missing something. Maybe some of the other Faulkner people can supplement here. But Faulkner had Quentin narrate a few short stories, in the late 20s and the early 1930s. So that's one way to branch out. Another way to branch out with Faulkner that I often recommend to a lot of first-time readers is to get yourself a copy of the Collected Stories and just start reading around in it, because those are bite-sized Faulkner, right? You just took on 300 plus pages of Faulkner. The Collected Stories volume has got, I think, 42 stories in it, and they give you a very wide-ranging look at how he imagined this fictional world, right, in Mississippi. And then he's got some non-Mississippi stories in the Collected Stories as well. If you start reading a story and it's just not speaking to you, I think you can put it down without really losing a major investment as a reader and just move on and try some other stories. But you can sort of learn what sides of Faulkner's work or his imagination really speak to you the most, and then you can do some further exploring to find out how to read more of that sort of, of that part of Faulkner's world, or to read more of that, that part of Faulkner's fiction. So that's one suggestion I often make, as a way to, get a lot of little views of Faulkner that you can then build out from.
Well, I will thank you, Jay, for that recommendation, and thank you for illuminating discussions of the Sound and the Fury. We are in your debt. It's been, as a person who's read the Sound and the Fury many times, I've learned a lot from you this time, and I know our first-time readers have had that wonderful experience of the first time with Faulkner, and they have learned a lot as well. So all of us, thank you. I hate to see it end.
Well, thanks, Suzanne. I do too, but thank all of you. This has been really fun, really interesting, and it's been great hearing your take on a really, really rich, challenging novel. And if you want to stick with Faulkner, you'll have lots more experiences like that in store for you.
Amen.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you also, Suzanne, for leading all the other sessions, and hope to see you all back again for our next book, The Wide Net. All right. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.